"You're not supposed to see me like this," Callie whispered, and those 7 words ended 6 years of marriage before I even understood what I was looking at. "My name is Brady. I'm 34 years old, I work night shifts as an ER nurse at a hospital here in Tulsa," and the woman standing in the corner booth of a bar called Palomino's that Tuesday night, my wife, Callie, had her hand pressed flat against the chest of a man I'd known since I was 19 years old. Teo. My best friend. The man who'd stood next to me at our wedding 6 years earlier, who'd given a toast that made half the room cry, who I'd called from the hospital parking lot more times than I could count over the years just to talk through a bad shift. Teo, whose hand was resting on the small of Callie's back like it had done that 100 times before, in a booth tucked into the back corner of a bar I'd only walked into because a coworker's going-away party had run later than expected and I needed a drink before driving home. I want to back up, because none of this makes sense without understanding what our life actually looked like before that Tuesday. Callie and I met in nursing school. She switched to elementary education after her second year, decided kids were more her speed than patience, and I always thought that made sense, the way she talked to people like she genuinely wanted to understand them rather than just fix them. We got married on a warm October Saturday with string lights and Teo's toast making everyone cry, and for 6 years, I believed, genuinely, uncomplicatedly believed, that we had built something solid. We'd been trying for a baby for over a year by that Tuesday. I want you to hold on to that detail, because it matters more than it seems like it should right now. I worked nights, which meant a lot of our marriage ran on a kind of asynchronous rhythm, me sleeping through mornings, her teaching second grade all day, us catching each other in the gaps, weekends mostly, the occasional dinner if my schedule lined up right. I never thought much of it. I trusted Callie the way I trusted very few things in my life, completely, instinctively, without the low-grade suspicion some of my coworkers seemed to carry about their own marriages. I used to think that trust was one of my better qualities. Standing in the doorway of Palomino's that Tuesday, I understood, all at once, that it might also have been the exact thing that let me miss this for as long as I apparently had. I hadn't planned to be there. That's the part that still sits strangely with me, even now, that the whole thing unraveled not because I went looking for it, but because a going-away party ran 2 hours longer than scheduled and I picked, almost at random, the closest bar to blow off some steam before driving home to an empty house. I saw them before they saw me. Teo's hand on her back. Her hand flat against his chest, fingers spread, in a gesture I recognized instantly because it was the exact way she used to touch me early in our relationship, back before 6 years of marriage had worn that particular gesture down into something more routine, less deliberate. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, a stranger in my own life, watching my wife and my best friend exist in a version of intimacy I didn't recognize as belonging to either of them, not the Callie who fell asleep on the couch some nights grading spelling tests, not the Teo who'd helped me move 3 different apartments over the years, who'd sat with me in a hospital cafeteria the night my father had his first heart attack. Then Callie looked up. I watched her face do something I will never be able to fully describe, recognition, then horror, moving across her features in real time, the color draining out of her. Brady. Her hand came off Teo's chest like she'd touched something hot. Oh my God, Brady, what are you? Marissa's going-away party ran late, I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected, almost conversational, which surprised me more than anything else happening in that moment. I just wanted a drink before I drove home. Teo had gone completely still beside her, the particular stillness of a man doing rapid math on exactly how much trouble he was actually in. You're not supposed to see me like this, Callie whispered, not to Teo, not really to me either, more like something escaping her before she could stop it, a sentence meant for no one, or maybe for herself. I didn't say anything else. I reached down, slid my wedding ring off my finger, a motion so automatic I barely registered doing it, and set it on the table between their 2 half-finished drinks. Then I turned and walked out of Palomino's into the cold Tulsa night, leaving my wife and my best friend sitting together in a booth, a ring between them, and absolutely no idea yet that the affair itself wasn't even close to the worst thing I was going to learn about either of them before this was over. I need to take you back several months before that Tuesday at Palomino's, because the affair, as devastating as it was, wasn't actually where this story started for me. It started somewhere quieter, somewhere I didn't even recognize as a beginning at the time. Callie and I had been trying for a baby for over a year by then. What started as excited, hopeful trying, the kind of trying you do with ovulation apps and a shared sense of anticipation, had slowly curdled, month after month, into something heavier. Neither of us talked about it much anymore. I noticed that shift and told myself it was just fatigue, the natural quieting that happens when hope keeps getting deferred. I didn't push. I've always thought of myself as someone who gives people room, who trusts that the people I love will tell me what they need when they're ready. Looking back, I understand now that giving room and staying willfully uninformed aren't always the same thing, even though I spent a long time treating them like they were. Life with Callie had a rhythm that spring that looked, from the outside, entirely normal. I worked my night shifts at the hospital, came home exhausted most mornings while she was getting ready for school, and we'd catch each other in these small windows, a shared breakfast some days, a late dinner on others, weekends when my schedule cooperated. I didn't notice, at first, that Callie had started seeing her doctor more frequently than she used to mention. She'd always been private about medical stuff, more than most people, something I'd chalked up to a general discomfort talking about her body that went back, she told me once, to some complicated relationship with her own mother. Teo came around more that spring too, though at the time it seemed like nothing. He and I had been close for 15 years, ever since college, and it wasn't unusual for him to swing by, grab a beer, watch a game with me on my rare evenings off. What I didn't notice, because I had absolutely no reason to look for it, was that he'd also started stopping by on days I wasn't home at all, days Callie later admitted, though not until much later, when the whole thing had already come apart. I want to stop here for a second. If you've ever trusted someone so completely that you stopped actually looking at them, not because anything seemed wrong, but simply because looking felt unnecessary, you already understand the particular kind of blindness I'm describing. Callie's sister, Denise, called me once that spring, an unusual thing in itself since Denise and I typically only talked through Callie. "Everything okay with you too?" she asked, in a tone I registered but didn't think much of. "Why wouldn't it be?" "No reason," Denise said, a little too quickly. "Just checking in." I let it go, the way I let most things go that spring, because letting go had always felt, to me, like a form of respect rather than a form of avoidance. She told me, much later, what those months had actually looked like on her end. I didn't know any of it at the time. I told myself it was just talking to a friend. That's the truth, at least at the start. Teo would come by, and he'd ask how I was doing with the trying, actually ask, in a way that felt different from how Brady asked, careful and quick, like he was afraid of the answer. Teo would sit with it. He'd let me cry sometimes without immediately trying to fix it or reassure me. I told myself that was all it was, someone letting me feel something out loud. I didn't understand yet how much that particular kind of attention could turn into something else, slowly, without me ever consciously deciding to let it. That's what she told me. At the time, all I had was a sister's slightly too quick answer and a growing quiet in my own house that I'd mistaken for exhaustion. That June, Callie had what she described as a routine follow-up appointment, one of several she'd started scheduling without much explanation, and came home unusually quiet that evening, picking at her dinner instead of actually eating it. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Fine," she said. "Just tired. Long day at school." I believed her. I want to be honest about that. It wasn't that I noticed something was wrong and chose to ignore it. I genuinely, completely believed her, the same uncomplicated way I'd believed her about everything for 6 years, and some part of me is still trying to figure out, even now, whether that trust was a virtue or simply a habit I'd never thought to examine. Teo texted me later that same week, something small and unrelated, a game he wanted to watch together that weekend, and I remember feeling grateful for it, grateful that even in a quiet, harder stretch of my marriage, I still had a friend who showed up consistently, who never seemed to need anything complicated from me beyond my company. I had no idea, that June, how much more complicated his presence in my life actually was than I understood, how the same steadiness I appreciated in him had already started reaching somewhere it had no business reaching. That July, at a cookout at Teo's place, I remember watching Callie laugh at something he'd said, head tilted back, easy and unguarded in a way I hadn't seen from her in weeks. I remember feeling glad, actually glad, that she had good friends around her during a hard stretch. I had absolutely no framework, that afternoon, for understanding what I was actually watching, no reason, yet, to look at my wife's laughter and my best friend's attention and see anything except two people I loved being kind to each other during a difficult year. I didn't know it yet, standing at that cookout with a beer in my hand, entirely unbothered, but the quiet that had settled into my marriage that spring wasn't really about fertility struggles at all, or rather, it was, but not in the way I understood it yet, and the answer, when it finally came, would reshape almost everything I thought I knew about the year I just lived through. The appointments kept happening through August, more frequent now, and I started noticing, really noticing, for the first time, that Callie had begun taking her phone into the bathroom when she showered, something she'd never done before, propped on the counter, screen angled toward the mirror instead of away from it. "Everything okay with the doctor stuff?" I asked one night, trying to sound casual. "It's fine," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "They're just being thorough. Running some extra tests." I didn't push. I told myself, the same way I'd been telling myself for months, that pushing would feel like an intrusion into something private and medical that was ultimately hers to navigate, and that my job was to support her, not interrogate her. Looking back now, I understand that particular restraint of mine had started serving a different purpose than I wanted to admit. It was easier to call it respect than to sit with how much distance had actually grown between us. That same week, I noticed our bank account was short by an amount I couldn't immediately place, not huge, $60, but specific enough that I logged in to check. A charge from a bar downtown, a Tuesday night I remembered because I'd worked a double shift and come home to an empty house, Callie already asleep, or so I'd thought. I didn't say anything about it. I told myself there was probably a simple explanation, a night out with Denise, maybe, or co-workers from school. I filed it away the way I'd been filing away small, forgettable details for months, not consciously deciding they meant nothing, just not deciding they meant anything either. I want to stop here for a second. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles into a man who has spent his whole life being the trusting one, the reasonable one, right up until the moment small, disconnected details start accumulating into something he can no longer pretend not to see. Maybe you know that quiet. It doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives in $60 increments, in phone screens angled away, in a wife who says fine a few too many times. Teo came by less that August, actually, which I noticed but didn't examine. I chalked it up to his own schedule, a new relationship he'd mentioned starting and then, strangely, never brought up again after the first mention. She told me, later, about a night that month I knew nothing about at the time, a moment that mattered more than I understood. I almost told him everything. I remember sitting across from Teo at that bar, my phone buzzing with a text from Brady asking if I wanted him to bring anything home for dinner, so normal, so completely unaware, and something in me wanted to just say it out loud right there, tell Teo this had to stop, that I needed to go home and actually talk to my husband instead of hiding in a booth with his best friend. I opened my mouth to say exactly that. And then Teo reached over and put his hand on mine, just for a second, and said something about how he hated seeing me carry so much alone, and I closed my mouth around what I'd meant to say and let the moment pass instead. I told myself there'd be a better night to end it. There's always a better night, until suddenly there isn't one left. That's what she told me, much later. At the time, I had no idea how close it had come to ending before I ever found out at all. Denise called me again in early September, and this time there was less pretense in her voice. "Brady," she said. "I need you to hear something, and I need you to not ask how I know it. Okay. Is everything all right with you and Callie? Really all right?" I sat with that question longer than I wanted to admit. "Why are you asking me this, Denise?" A pause. "No reason. I've just been worried. About both of you." She said it too fast, the way people talk when they're carefully editing themselves in real time, choosing which pieces of a truth belong to them and which belong to someone else's confession. If there's something I should know. There isn't, she said, and I heard, underneath the word, exactly how much she wanted that to be true and exactly how little she actually believed it herself. I let it go. Again. I understand now that I let a great many things go that fall, not because I was oblivious exactly, but because the alternative, actually looking closely at my marriage, at my best friend, at the growing quiet in my own house, felt like it would cost me something I wasn't ready to pay. That September, at a dinner Callie hosted for a few of her teacher friends, I remember Teo showing up unannounced, something he'd never done before, standing in our kitchen with a six-pack he hadn't been asked to bring, laughing a little too loud at something one of the teachers said, glancing at Callie in a way that, at the time, registered as nothing more than ordinary friendliness. I didn't see anything wrong that night. I've gone back over that memory more times than I'd like to admit since, searching for a crack I must have missed, and I still can't fully explain how the surface held so completely for so long. That same week, I finally asked Callie directly about the doctor's appointments, not accusingly, just genuinely curious, the way a husband should have been asking for months already. There's something going on with the fertility stuff, she admitted, finally, though her eyes wouldn't quite meet mine. It's more complicated than we thought. I don't want to talk about the specifics yet. I need a little more time. I told her I understood. I told her to take whatever time she needed. I didn't know it yet, sitting across from her that September evening, giving her exactly the space and trust I'd always prided myself on giving, but the complications she was referring to were about to become the second half of a story I still, at that point, only half understood, and the person who'd known the fuller truth for months wasn't her doctor. It was Teo. The $60 charge from that Tuesday bar visit turned out to be the first thread I actually pulled, though it took me until October to pull it properly. I found 4 more charges from the same bar over the following weeks, going back through the account with the kind of methodical attention I'd normally reserve for triaging patients in the ER, cross-referencing dates, times, cost, building a timeline the way you'd build one for a case history. All Tuesdays. All evenings I'd been working a shift. That was the moment something in me finally shifted for good. Looking back now, I understand that everything before it, Denise's careful questions, the phone angled toward the mirror, Teo's unannounced dinner appearance, had already told me most of what I needed to know. I just hadn't let myself finish the sentence. The bank statements didn't break something new in me. They confirmed what I'd already quietly buried for months. I called the doctor's office that same week, using an excuse about needing to confirm an insurance detail, and the receptionist mentioned, entirely without meaning to, that Callie's recent visits had involved a referral to a specialist, not simply fertility monitoring, something more specific, a name I didn't recognize on a clinic 3 towns over. I sat with that information for 2 full days before I did anything with it. I want to stop here for a second. There's a particular kind of discipline required to keep functioning normally, working shifts, coming home, eating dinner across the table from someone, while quietly assembling a picture you're terrified to finish. I don't think I fully understood, until that October, how much energy trust actually costs once you've started to doubt it. It isn't free. It never was. I just never had to pay attention to the bill before. I texted Teo that week, something ordinary, checking if he wanted to grab a beer that weekend the way we used to, mostly to see how he'd respond. He took almost 6 hours to text back, uncharacteristically slow for him, and when he finally did, his answer felt oddly careful, hedged in a way that wasn't like him at all. Been swamped lately. Rain check. I stared at that text longer than it deserved. Denise called me a 3rd time in mid-October, and this time, there was no pretense left in her voice at all. Brady, she said, I can't keep doing this. I need to tell you something, and I need you to understand I've been sitting on it for months because Callie made me promise. I felt something in my chest go very still. Tell me. I don't know all of it, she said. But I know it's not just the fertility stuff being complicated. I know Teo knows something you don't. And I think, Brady, I think you need to ask her directly, tonight, because I don't think I can carry this for her anymore." She hung up before I could ask anything further, leaving me standing in my kitchen holding a phone that had just handed me the outline of something I still didn't have the full shape of. That same week, at the hospital, during a slow overnight shift, I finally called the specialist's office directly, framing it as a follow-up on my wife's referral. The nurse on the line, following what she clearly believed was standard consent procedure since I was listed as an emergency contact on Callie's file, confirmed something that landed in my chest like a physical blow: a diagnosis, months old already, something affecting the fertility struggles we'd been quietly enduring together, except that I hadn't actually been enduring it together at all. I'd been enduring half of it, alone, without knowing the other half existed. I didn't say anything to Callie that week. I want to be honest about why. I was terrified of being wrong, terrified of confronting her with an incomplete picture and being the kind of husband who accused before he understood. I had spent 6 years being good at exactly the wrong things, giving space instead of asking questions, trusting instead of looking closely, mistaking silence for respect when it was actually just fear wearing a more comfortable name. I gathered what I had instead: the bank statements, the specialist's confirmation, the timeline Denise had unknowingly helped me build, the way you document evidence at a job site before a wall gets torn down and whatever's behind it disappears for good. That following Tuesday, Callie mentioned, almost offhand, that she had a work thing that evening, something with a few teachers from school. I didn't ask for details. Instead, for reasons I couldn't fully explain to myself, I texted a coworker to see if her long-planned going-away drinks were still happening that same night, somewhere downtown. I didn't know it yet, agreeing to that going-away party almost as an afterthought, that I was about to walk, entirely by accident, into the exact bar where 4 Tuesday night charges had already told me more than I wanted to know, and that the man sitting across from my wife in that booth would turn out to be carrying a piece of the truth even heavier than the affair itself. Callie showed up at the house 40 minutes after I did, her car pulling into the driveway too fast, gravel crunching under tires in a way that felt like an apology before she'd said a single word. I was sitting at the kitchen table when she came in, the folder of bank statements and the specialist's confirmation printout laid out in front of me like evidence at a trial I hadn't planned to hold that night, but here we were. "Brady." Her voice broke on my name. "Please, let me explain." "How long?" I said. "That's the only question I want answered tonight." "How long with Teo?" She stood in the doorway, still in her coat, mascara already streaked. 4 months. Since June. I laughed. It came out of me before I could stop it, not cruel, not mockery, just shock finding the only exit left available to it, a sound I barely recognized as my own. She flinched hard at that. 4 months, I repeated, once I could talk again. My best friend. The man who stood next to me at our wedding. I kept my voice level, quieter than I expected, which I think frightened her more than shouting would have. "You gave away something I spent 6 years trusting completely. Not just the marriage. The version of you I actually thought I knew." "I know," she said. "I know, and I don't have an excuse that makes it better, but Brady, I need to tell you the rest, because it's not just." "I already know about the diagnosis," I said. "I called the specialist's office this week. I know it's not just fertility monitoring." Her face changed completely at that, not more shame, something closer to fear. "You know?" she said. "How much do you know?" "I know there's a diagnosis. I don't know what it is. Nobody's told me what it actually is, Callie, which is its own kind of insane, considering it's apparently been sitting in a medical file with my name listed as your emergency contact for months." She sat down slowly across from me, hands trembling around nothing, and for a long moment she didn't say anything at all. "There's something you need to know," she said finally. "And it's not really about me and Teo. Or it is, but it's not the worst part. The worst part isn't the affair, Brady." I stared at her. "What are you talking about?" "The diagnosis," she said. "It's mine. A fertility condition, the reason we've been struggling. It was never anything you did or didn't do, it was always me. I found out in June. Her voice cracked. Teo has known since the week I found out. I told him before I told you. I told him, and I asked him not to say anything, and he agreed, and somewhere in that agreement, in him carrying something that heavy for me when you weren't there, that's how it started. That's the truth. That's how it actually started. I sat very still, the specialist's confirmation printout suddenly meaning something entirely different than I'd understood it to mean 20 minutes earlier. You told him before you told me, I said slowly. Your husband. About your own body. About the reason we haven't been able to have a baby. You told Teo first. I was scared, she said. I was so scared of how you'd look at me once you knew it was me, not us, not bad luck, me, specifically, something wrong with me specifically, and I couldn't. She stopped, pressing her hand to her mouth. Tell me the rest, I said. All of it. I need to hear the whole thing, not just the parts that make you look less guilty. She took a shaking breath. It started with him just listening, she said. That's genuinely how it started, Brady. I need you to believe that even if nothing else. He let me cry about it without immediately trying to fix it the way you always try to fix everything. I told myself that was all it was, someone letting me feel something without an agenda. I told myself that the first time he held my hand, too, that it didn't count if I never let it happen again. I actually believed that. I think I needed to. But then there was another time. And another. Every single time I told myself the same lie, this is the last one, and every time it got a little easier to believe it a little less. I started scheduling things around seeing him without admitting to myself that's what I was doing. Extra appointments that weren't really extra appointments. I became someone who was genuinely good at lying to you. That terrifies me more now than it did then. I couldn't look at the nursery paint samples still sitting in our closet some mornings. We picked those out together last spring, before any of this, back when it was still just hopeful trying, and I'd open that closet some days and not be able to look at them directly, because I knew what I was carrying that you didn't know about, both things, the diagnosis and Teo, and I was the only one holding all of it. I tried to stop it once, in August. Told him it was over. Her voice cracked on the word over, small and specific in a way that landed harder than anything else she'd said. Lasted 11 days. I don't have a good excuse for going back. I just did. I love you, Brady. That was never not true, even through all of this. I just stopped feeling like myself somewhere inside being afraid you'd stop loving me once you knew about my body, and I went looking for comfort in exactly the wrong place, with exactly the wrong person, the one person who already knew the thing I was most afraid to tell you. The kitchen was silent after that, just the refrigerator humming, the folder of evidence sitting between us meaning something entirely different than it had an hour earlier. Get out, I said finally. Not forever tonight. Just tonight. I can't be in this house with you right now. She didn't argue. She stood, gathered her coat, and paused at the door. I'm sorry, she said. For all of it. Even the part one haven't figured out how to be sorry for yet. I didn't answer. I didn't know it yet, sitting alone at that kitchen table with a folder of evidence that had turned out to mean something entirely different than I'd expected, but the hardest conversation of the entire ordeal wasn't the one I just had with my wife, it was the one still waiting for me with Teo. I called Teo 3 days later. Not to reconcile, I was clear with myself about that before I dialed, but because 15 years of friendship doesn't just evaporate without one last conversation, even when it should. You knew, I said, when he picked up. Before any of it started. You knew about her diagnosis before I did. Silence on the line, long enough that I almost hung up. I did, he said finally. She asked me not to tell you. I should have told you anyway. I've known that for months and I didn't do it. You were supposed to be my best friend. I know. His voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. I don't have anything that makes that better, Brady. I'm not going to try to give you one. We didn't speak again after that call. I heard, through mutual friends over the following months, that most of our old group had quietly stopped inviting him to things, not through any campaign I orchestrated, just the natural erosion of a social circle once people understand what someone actually did with 15 years of trust. He moved to Dallas that winter, for work, people said, though I suspect distance served him for more reasons than his job. The divorce took 4 months. Oklahoma doesn't require much drama when one party already has bank statements, a folder of evidence, and no interest in dragging things out. I kept the house. Callie moved into an apartment near the school where she taught, and the last I heard, she was still there, still teaching, though we haven't spoken directly in over a year beyond a single email about forwarding some mail. Looking back now, I can name every place I should have looked closer sooner: the phone angled toward the mirror, Denise's careful questions, Teo's unannounced dinner appearance in September. Every one of those was a door I chose not to open, mistaking my own trust for a virtue instead of recognizing it, eventually, as a habit I'd never once examined. I used to think giving people space was the same thing as loving them well. I understand now that sometimes it's just a more comfortable name for looking away. I started sleeping through the night again sometime that spring, not because the grief was gone, but because I'd finally stopped carrying 2 separate weights at once, the affair, and the strange, lingering hurt of having been the last person to know something about my own wife's body that mattered as much as it did. I ran into Denise at a grocery store that April, and she hugged me longer than either of us probably expected, apologizing again for not telling me sooner. "You did tell me," I said. "Eventually. That's more than some people manage." I started running again that summer, something I'd let slide during the busiest years of nursing school and marriage, and found, somewhere around the 3rd week of actually sticking with it, that I felt lighter than I had in longer than I wanted to admit, not because anything had been resolved exactly, but because I'd stopped waiting for it to be. I could have stayed angry at both of them indefinitely. For a while, I did. But somewhere that summer, running the same route past the hospital where I still work nights, I chose to set it down instead, and that turned out to be the only kind of winning that actually mattered. I wasn't the same man who'd walked into Palomino's that Tuesday looking for nothing more complicated than a drink after a long shift. I was quieter now, in a different way, not the uncomplicated trust one used to mistake for strength, but something steadier, a man who'd learned the difference between giving someone space and simply refusing to look. That's my story: a wedding ring left on a bar table, a folder of bank statements, a closet full of unused paint samples I finally donated last month. Thank you for staying with me through all of it. If any part of this hit close to home, tell me in the comments. I read every one, and I'd genuinely love to hear your story too. See you in the next one.